Kia ora everyone, welcome to our second story that we've put online for you. Today though, Mrs. Oldham is going to be reading the story and we've got some teachers and learning assistants lined up who are also going to share some of their stories with you. We hope you enjoy it, and before we start, just a big shout out to Kyla, Sophie, Angel, Xavier and Caitlin, who I all heard from via email that they'd listened to the first story and enjoyed it. So I hope you enjoy this one as much, and keep an eye out because there'll be more coming as well.
Kia ora koutou tamariki mā, it's Mrs. O here, and just going to read you a story. But first, before I do that, sending you lots of aroha and thinking of you guys as school is closed at the moment, hoping you're well, and just making sure that you guys have something to do on your break. So the story I'm going to read you today is called The Last Tree on the Island. It's written and illustrated by Bob Derrick. Mr. and Mrs. Smith lived on a small island. Just them, a cat, a dog, some birds, and a tree. Mr. Smith thought the tree was too big and too shady, so one day he cut the tree down. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The tree was beautiful. Now the island is going to look bare." So Mr. Smith built a huge statue thing. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The tree changed colour every season and looked beautiful all year round." So Mr. Smith put coloured lights around it, ones that shone different colours for each season. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The roots of the tree used to hold the soil together and stopped the land sliding away. Your statue won't do that." So Mr. Smith built walls and fences on the slope. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The tree used to shade us on hot, sunny days, and it gave the birds a place to rest and shelter." So Mr. Smith built perches, big and small, for the birds, and shelters over them to keep the rain and sun off, just like the tree used to do, and little shelves where the birds could build their nests. And he made a bin and filled it with straw and sticks for their nests. And he built a big shade umbrella over the house. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "When the leaves used to fall, the birds loved to scratch in them, and I used them as fertiliser for my garden." So Mr. Smith bought a load of fertiliser and straw. But first he had to build a wharf to land the stuff, and the smell was awful. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The wind used to make beautiful, soothing sounds blowing through the leaves and branches of the tree. Now there's no sound." So Mr. Smith made wind chimes and hung them around the house to rustle and tinkle in the breezes. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "I had a swing hanging in the tree and loved to sit in it, and the cat loved to climb among the tree branches, and the dog sniffed its trunk." So Mr. Smith built a swinging seat, and a trellis for the cat to climb in, and a post for the dog to sniff. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "Every year we used to pick fresh fruit from the tree." So Mr. Smith built a machine that made sweet-tasting, juicy lumps of food. But first he had to build a bigger wharf and lifting machinery to unload the shiploads of ingredients he needed. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "Every year we could get old branches from the tree for firewood." So Mr. Smith built another machine that squeezed wood chips and old bits of wood into blocks that could be used as fuel for the fire. Another ship had to bring the chips and wood. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "The tree used to suck in any bad air that was around and give off fresh, good air to breathe." So Mr. Smith built an air filtering machine. It sucked in the gases, smokes, and fumes from the machines and puffed out clean air. "Silly twit," said Mrs. Smith. "It used to be nice and quiet here. Now all these machines and cranes and ships kick up an awful noise. So Mr. Smith built big silencers on all the machines, and rubber bumpers to stop things banging, and plastic covers to stop things clattering. He told Mrs. Smith to come and see. She didn't call him a silly twit this time. She had gone. She'd packed her suitcase, her cat, and her dog, and moved to another island. One that had nothing on it but a big tree. So that's the end of The Last Tree on the Island, a story about how we need to look after the nature we have because we can't actually fix anything on our own without causing some more problems along the way. Thinking of you guys, sending you lots of big hugs, big virtual hugs, and hoping that you stay safe at this time. Take care. Ka kite.